team, this is Velasquez, and we're ready to continue our discussion of looking at our three branches of government, specifically focused on Congress. And with this flip lecture, I'd like to take some time just to give some brief introduction to the Senate. So as usual, as I go through this introduction, it's always a good idea to have your notebook handy. That way you can jot down any notes that again you can bring to our discussion in class or any of our activities. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in here. So looking at Congress, or looking at the legislative branch, we've already discussed, right? There are two houses. We have the House of Representatives and we also have the Senate. So this was again put in place to ensure the equality of all states, right, big and small, and every state gets an equal number of senators, right? In the House of Representatives, we have the discussion of population, right, redistricting and reapportionment, but in the Senate, each state gets two. So if you look on the screen right now, the image, you can see the colored dots, right? Each state has two dots. So if there's two blue dots, for example, in California, right, we have two senators, and each senator, again, is coming from the Democratic Party. So if you see a red or blue dot, you're going to see that there are two political parties, and up in sort of the northeast, those yellow dots indicate independent. So you can kind of see how it lies across the map. So unlike the House, senators represent all the people in their states. So when we had our discussion of gerrymandering, right, this does not apply to the Senate. We don't have a situation where we can redistrict and again pack or crack districts. Each senator is going to represent the entire state. Now currently we just finished up our 2020 election, and we have a situation where we are close to looking at the balance of power. We'll talk about this more in class, but right now we have a situation in which Georgia is about to have a runoff in the next coming months to determine who will be the actual senators. We have two very close races, and this will determine the next Senate's balance of power. Right now, currently based on our election results, this is November of 2020, we do have a 50-50 split. And again, we'll see again based on the outcome of this, which party will have the majority in the Senate. Now, of course, if there was a tie, Congress has also, or I should say the Constitution is put in place. If there's a tie, the Vice President serves as the tiebreaker. All right, so we definitely want to pay attention to how the Senate is going to play out in the coming weeks. So the question is always, when we look at the Senate versus the House, why did the framers make the Senate smaller than the House, right? So if you have 50 states, you have two per state, you have 100 senators. The framers really hoped that the Senate would kind of be more the enlightened or the more responsible of the two branches. And it's important to know that they also set the qualifications slightly different. So to be a senator, the qualifications, you have to be at least 30 years old to be a senator, versus for the House of Reps, you only have to be 25. And for to be a U.S. citizen for at least 9 years to be a senator versus a representative, you can only be for 7. For a senator, you must live in the state you represent. And again, for a representative, you must live in your district that you represent. Now, the framers also thought the House would be more impacted by public opinion, right? So a little closer to the people. So in that case, right, the members of the House only serve for 2-year terms. Then the representatives have to run for re-election. Now, what's different here and important to note, the senators, they're elected and they serve for 6-year terms. So they don't really have to run for re-election often as members of the House. And there was kind of hope put in place that the Senate would kind of check on, more of the larger, more chaotic, more difficult to develop legislation and making compromises. It was hoping the Senate would provide that balance in that case. So what else makes the Senate more stable, in quotation marks, than the House of Representatives? Another thing to make note of is the senators actually serve in staggered terms. So all senators serve for 6-year terms, but they weren't all elected at the same time. So every 2 years, only a third of the senators are up for re-election. Now, just looking in our discussion of California, right, we have 2 senators currently in California. We have Kamala Harris that was elected in 2016, and we have Dianne Feinstein, which is reelected in 2018. Now, at the time I'm recording this flipped lecture, of course, history has been made with Kamala Harris being the first African American Black female vice president. And again, she will be sworn into office in 2021, and that means that her seat will be open for fulfillment. So at the time, again, the governor, Gavin Newsom, will be assigning or basically selecting her replacement. And that particular seat will be open again in 2022. And then again, it will be open for Californians to elect. Now, also something to make note of is the fact that previously, actually, the senators had been picked by state legislature. Now, that had changed after 1912 and the 17th Amendment, and now again, senators are elected directly from the people. So there was a switch with amendment to the Constitution. Now, why else did the framers give the senators staggered terms? They wanted the Senate to be a continuous body. So you can imagine, right, they didn't want 100 new senators fresh from the state, right, sort of starting from scratch. They really wanted the members to be more experienced, have more time working together. You know, it's also important to know, right, if you're comparing the difference between re-election 2 years versus 6 years, if you're running for election every 2 years, House of Representatives, right, they don't really get time to like celebrate the victory, right? They are almost sort of, before you know it, right, they're digging into their work and they have to start planning again for re-election. So with the senators, right, having the 6-year terms, they have a little more time to sort of dig in and again get to know the work, the people, and ultimately trying to do good in their positions to represent us. So therefore, again, just to repeat, only a third of the senators would be open or be up for re-election during the same year. So what are the advantages of the 6-year term? Again, I kind of mentioned this already. Job security. It allows them not to think about re-election every 2 years. Because the House of Representatives have to run every 2 years, they're more likely to vote by way of the people they represent. So there's a little bit, again, as the framers would call it, that buffer or that kind of theory that the senators weren't as closely tied to the people, therefore they could be, again, making better decisions for the greater good. So that's exactly what the framers expected when they tried to put into place these 2 chambers of the legislative branch. All right, so let me go ahead and pause here, and there's a few questions that we'll be discussing later. So as you look over these questions, if you want to go back and rewind the video and just make sure you understand kind of just the basic foundations of the Senate. And of course, we'll be digging in more so a little bit about the roles and responsibilities in class. All right, team, stay tuned.